Drink and be merry, merry, merry boys. Let all your delights be in Hymen's joys. Yo to Hymen, now the day has come. About the merry maple, take a room. Please take a room, take a seat, be welcome. This is Thursday, May 1st, 2025, the 398th anniversary of Thomas Morton of Merrymount's Revels at Merrymount in 1627, the first known major revel in America. Your town could do a lot worse than to institute revels of its own every May. Boston, Massachusetts, that is, has declared May 1st to be Thomas Morton Day. That's a pretty good signal of where our cultural trajectory is going. At least for a change, we'll take positive signs wherever we can get them, right? And I want you to know also that an organization called New Red Order, you can look them up, Google them, a very articulate Native American centered activism and scholarly group, is going to be launching numerous public events this year in honor of Thomas Morton, both in May, and I think they have something big cooking up for October. So please look up New Red Order, see what those events are, and I know you're going to get a kick out of them. I've been working in affiliation with these great gentlemen, and they are extremely creative, good-humored, scholarly to the letter, and again, I can only say don't miss it. If you do miss it, or if you have so far, go to ancientlights.org, my professional website. It's a collaborative, ancientlights.org. And you can see at a page called Revels at Merrymount Today, many wonderful film clips of the great people, the skilled musicians, the wonderful dancers of traditional Maytime Revel celebrations that we've done over many years since the 90s and 2000s. And I think you'll enjoy them and maybe even feel tempted to either attend such an event or to start one in your own town. Now, one other thing at wordpress.com, Jack Dempsey, writer at wordpress.com, you can see the text of the article I'm going to share with you today. It's full of laughter, common sense, and plenty of insight to go against, yes, like Morton did in his own book, New English Canaan of 1637, the trends, the assumptions, the blind spots, the mistakes, the clownish bad behavior that drove the change from a Morton-style economy and trading post at Merrymount, which invited all comers to participate and even involved interracial marriages with Native people. And the change from that to the Christian-centered colonies of Plymouth Plantation, the Pilgrims, as you know, and Boston's first-generation settlers, the Puritans, under John Winthrop. They were all extremely antagonistic to Morton having anything to say about the America that was going to come. Was it going to be, as he said, a country of respect, compassion, sharing, and merriment, good-humored community? Or was it going to be the community of a group of willful, violent colonialists who built first order of business a fence around themselves against the entire landscape and its native peoples? Well, I think you can kind of guess which way that story has gone over these 398 years. And well, we're here to say if they changed it one way, we can change it another. So just let me add one other piece of information. The first rule of Revels, Morton outlines in his little drinking song, which you can hear performed at Ancient Lights in the many pages devoted to Morton. The first word of each of his four verses are make, nectar, give, give. The first rule of Revels is to bring something to share, and you will get it back manyfold from other participants. That's how it works. So again, happy May Day. In Massachusetts, happy Thomas Morton Day. And here's my hope that you'll raise a rowdy maypole, join hands with neighbors, kick up your dancing feet, and hoist some excellent beer to your singing lips to celebrate these 398 years since Morton's first one at Merrymount in 1627. So to the feast, I offer here another first of its kind story out of Morton's 1637 New English Canaan. As usual for him, a bit of crucial, as I said, common sense perspective wrapped in biting comedy and hoots of laughter. Now, this is called Frontier Fool, by the way, America's priceless master bubble. We'll never likely know who was the real frontier clown dubbed Master Bubble in chapters 10 and 12 of Canaan's third book, but his seems a pretty sure case of you can't make this stuff up. For he was a man endowed with many special gifts, as Morton says, that you're about to see in action, whose self-sanctified blunders remain too much with us on the international frontier even now. Please sit back and enjoy and get ready to laugh. In horror. This, Morton writes, was a man approved by the brethren, meaning his neighbors, the evangelical saints of Plymouth Plantation's Pilgrim Fathers, and at the public charge conveyed to New England during Morton's first years there, 1624 to 27. Why is worth knowing. For Plymouth's congregation had years of trouble replacing their original beloved pastor, John Robinson, who had not been allowed to emigrate with them in 1620. His most famous counsel came in a letter after Plymouth had assassinated multiple native New England leaders at Wessagusset or Weymouth in 1623. Oh, he says, that you had converted some before you had killed any. Thoughtful fellow. But as you will see from just this Canaan excerpt, there were indeed more thoughtful people hereabout at the time. Before the Plymouthers fetched Bubble over, they had tried one other fellow, now known only as Mr. Rogers, but he proved even to them, quote, crazed in his brain, and was dismissed. What was the problem? Their England brimming then with fire-breathing Puritan reformers. For Morton, it was their contempt for solid Renaissance and humanistic learning based in anything outside the Bible, which, if we can trust their records, left them floundering in a flood of holy pretenders, charlatans, and fools. When Morton says Bubble was brought over, quote, for his zeal and gifts, he names the two central but tragically fuzzy Puritan criteria for choosing a spiritual minister and leader, and they were echoed soon after by Boston's famous Reverend John Cotton. Fierce zealotry and matching gifts such as oratorical fireworks and, quote, the exercise of prophecy. Well, Morton muses, as if watching the country prepare for Father Coughlin, Billy Graham, and Jerry Falwell, if you mark it, these are special gifts indeed, which the vulgar people are so taken with that there is no persuading them that it is so ridiculous. This that comes without premeditation, that is, by instant inspiration of the Holy Spirit. This is the superlative, and he that does not approve of this, they say, is a very reprobate. Not a good place to be, outside of God's own congregation, warns the man who found himself America's first rascal and first political exile, burned and hoisted out of the country for practicing the wrong kinds of culture. He is also America's first poet in English. If you don't believe me, look it up at Ancient Lights, and you'll see an examination and research into the question that will show you the fact. And what would take Merrymount's learned, jovial, flexible, and common sense place? Here's a quick Canaan gem about another holy candidate who foreshadows Bubble's misadventures. Quote, there was one who had been expected to exercise his gifts in an assembly who stayed his coming. In the midst of his journey, he falls into a fit, which they term a zealous meditation, and was 4 miles past the place appointed before he came to himself, or did remember whereabouts he went. Familiar, all too familiar, but these jokers were nothing if not ambitious to dispense edification. Witness Bubble's own sparkling resume of achievements leading up to his fool's errand into the inhabited wilderness. For himself, Bubble had first intended, quote, to pen the language of native New England down in stenography. But there, Morton says, for want of use, which he rightly understood not, all was loss of labor. How indeed could an Englishman acquire native speech without consenting to use it, like Morton, the successful trader, in the land's already mixed language in frontier affairs? Remember, Plymouth's William Bradford hoped that America's tongue would be Hebrew. Well, Morton quips in so many words, it might have been worth the learning later in Bubble's story if he had understood native languages. But even after all the trouble, this never dawned upon the man. That almost murderous slapstick results were rooted here and fast upon us. Dropping the difficult stenography, Bubble's next unsurprising choice was ministry itself, trying his hand as house chaplain to the rough company of another unruly Morton neighbor, Plymouth's first outcast, John Oldham, living by then near the sea at close by Hull. Every night, he says, Bubble began making use of his gifts, and his oratory lulled his oratory lulled his auditory as fast asleep as Mercury's pipes did Argus' eyes. Maybe Chaplain Bubble did make a striking start in a speech or two, but, quote, when he was in, they said he could not tell how to get out. Nay, he would hardly out until he were fired out. His zeal was such. Losing his theological way, Bubble even then would not shut up until they kicked him out of the cabin. So Bubble would now become a great merchant. He removed and obtained house room among Morton's own bilgy company, 9 persons besides dogs, as he describes it, quote, because it stood convenient for the beaver trade. Morton thought this big-boned man would be a good laborer and to have store of corn. But Bubble brought no provisions, only, quote, the trophies of his honor, his water tankard and his porter's basket, becoming another mouth to feed through Morton's hunting and trapping skills. Bubble himself had none of those either, but that didn't keep him from rushing out in a boat to shoot ducks and geese in haste and single-handed, paddling out like a cow in a cage to wound many and scare off the rest, causing Morton, his host, quote, to mutter at him. And once Morton's gun had put some meat on the table, this man and his host at dinner, Bubble begins to say grace, yea, and a long one too, till all the meat was cold. He would not give his host, Morton, leave to say grace, belike he thought his host past grace. And, quote, in the usage of this blind oratory, meaning Bubble praying with his eyes sanctimoniously closed, Morton took himself abused, and the wiles fell to, eating, and had half done before this man Bubble would open his eyes to see what stood afore him. Now, Morton's years at London's boisterous law school, the Inns of Court, were the professional crown of his youth. Surely he had mentors and help in seasoned elders there, whose pedagogy consciously curried young talent toward national service. Maybe that's why we already see Morton's patient indulgence toward Bubble. On the other hand, when he at last matched Bubble with, quote, a couple of Indians for guides for an inland journey toward the matchless profits of the beaver trade, maybe Morton was ready to be rid of him. Bubble got ready by filling, quote, a sack of odd implements and his head with a conceit that he had hatched a new device or trading method to obtain those furs, full of zeal and gifts as usual. Their introduction seemed cordial and comfortable enough, and with, quote, both his journeymen glad he was good man, Bubble and his native guides set off westward into central Massachusetts, land of the Nipmuc peoples, Nashaway and Shawatuck clans. For Bubble's sake, remember that they were hiking deep into old-growth American forest, whose thickets and massive hardwood trees intimidated even the likes of Henry David Thoreau. A greenhorn like Bubble simply had to feel intimidated, vulnerable, and yes, watchfully afraid. So let's have Morton tell the rest of what happened. Night came on. But before they were inclined to sleep, this good man, Master Bubble, had a fantasy creeped into his head by misunderstanding the savage's actions. He must needs be gone in all haste, yea, and without his errand. He purposed to do it so cunningly that his flight should not be suspected. He leaves his shoes in the house with all other implements and flies. As he was on his way, he increased his own fear, suggesting to himself that he was pursued by a company of Indians and that their arrows will let fly as thick as hail at him. He puts off his breeches, puts them on his head for to save him from the shafts that flew after him so thick that no man could perceive them, and crying out, "Avoid, Satan, what have you to do with me?" And thus running on his way without his breeches, he was pitifully scratched with the brush of the underwoods as he wandered up and down in unknown ways. The savages, in the meantime, put up all his implements in the sack he left behind and brought them to Wessaguscus, or Weymouth, where they thought to have found him. But understanding he was not returned, they were fearful what to do, and of what would be conceived by the English to have become of this mazed man, and were in consultation of the matter. One of the savages was of opinion that the English would suppose him to be murdered. Fearful he was to come in sight. The other, better acquainted with the English, having lived some time in England, was more confident, and he persuaded his fellow that the English would be satisfied with the relation of the truth, having had testimony of his fidelity. So they boldly adventured what they had brought and how the matter stood. The English, when the sack was opened, did take a note in writing of all the particulars in the sack, and heard what was related by the savages of the accidents. But when Master Bubble's shoes were shown, it was thought he would not have departed without his shoes, and therefore they did conceive that Master Bubble was murdered by some sinister practice of the savages, who unadvisedly had become guilty of a crime which they now sought to excuse. And the English straightly charged the savages to find him out again and bring him dead or alive, else their wives and their children would be destroyed. The poor savages, being in a pitiful perplexity, caused their countrymen to seek out for this mazed man, who, being in short time found, was brought to Wessaguscus, where he made a discourse of his travels, and all the perilous passages which did seem to be no less dangerous than that of the worthy knight-errant Don Quixote, and how miraculously he had been preserved. And in conclusion, he lamented, the Bubble, the great loss of his goods, whereby he thought himself undone. The particular whereof being demanded, it appeared that the salvages had not diminished any part of them, no, not so much as one bit of bread, whereby Master Bubble was overjoyed, and the whole company made themselves merry at his discourse of all his perilous adventures. And by this, Morton says, you may observe whether the salvage people are not full of humanity, or whether they are a dangerous people, as Master Bubble and the rest of his tribe would persuade you. Unquote from here on as we close. Now, did Bubble's native guides encourage a bit of fear in the man to make him more dependent or even grateful for protection and profit in this unknown country? Perhaps. But without Morton's seasoned confidence, one folly unfolds the next. Bubble misconstrues or misunderstands, decides to run away God knows where, and cleverly leaves his shoes behind, thinking this will fool his hosts that he's still invisibly with them. Now he imagines they are with him, but chasing him and with arrows, such that he strips off his pants, turns them into a helmet, and is pitifully scratched as he wanders up and down screaming. This, it seems, will not end well. By the way, Morton did not witness or hear Bubble's scream of "Avoid, Satan." In modern parlance, the phrase means "devils, go to hell." But it may even evoke typical attitudes that Morton heard in Bubble's mouth, suggesting that Native Americans were born and deserved to be in England's worst imaginable cosmic place. And where do we now find the crucial, calm exercise of reason and experience? It speaks for the first time in this, the most extraordinary narrative turn in America's earliest letters between Bubble's two native guides, who resolve, in spite of wise fear about catching the blame, to report Bubble's mazed running off. And notice how cautious they are about it. First, they determine that Bubble has not returned before they go into the midst of the English at Wessagusset. These guides are afraid of English fear, which they know will assume that Bubble has been murdered or killed in their hands. They know they'll have to present the ridiculous facts on the very ground where, all too recently, Captain Shrimp Miles Standish assassinated others of their kind. Still, they go in and report, making their best case with Bubbles' sack of implements. But it's Bubbles' own most preposterous ploy, his abandoned shoes, that brings on the fresh and very credible English threat to destroy their families, wives, and children if this fool isn't found. Terrified, the guides find and return Master Bubble in short order. And here at last, for all Morton has put his readers through, lands a thud of anticlimax. For Bubble tells all of his perilous passages with an empty-headed air of the miraculous. It was all about him. Not one stab of self-aware sunlight dawns on this mazed man for his own chief part in this fiasco. So Morton drops it in the lap of those who would build America, the people then and us still today. Bubble, all for himself and virtually empty, would not listen, look, or learn. Yet, through New English Canaan, we have twice the chance. I want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, very much for joining me on May Day 2025, 398 years since the original American Revels. Hope you'll visit ancientlights.org and find out a lot more about this amazing man who deserves a full-length feature film. Check out the links where I supplement some of this information with further material. And I wish you and your American and world community a very happy May Day. Drink and be merry.